Hello and welcome back to another episode of Science Radio. It is not just another episode though. It is our 200th episode and I am super excited. All right, everyone.
Wait, let's do it right down the barrel.
Oh, damn.
As you can see if you're watching the video, and as you can probably hear if you're listening to the audio, I am joined by three wonderful, wonderful people that have had an integral hand in making the show go over the last couple of years, people for whom the show would not be here at 200 episodes. So, in a roundabout way, let's start with our editor-in-chief, our fearless leader, Jared Stackelroll.
Thanks, Zanita, for the fanfare.
Speaking of which, Zanita Fletcher.
Are you gonna do that back to her now?
Thank you.
Man, this is never going to get
People
old.
are not going to enjoy listening to this.
And returning, the prodigal son once again has come temporarily back to the fold. It is Daniel Kuberek.
Do I blow my own horn?
Yeah, you can blow your own horn if you want to.
Why does it keep going down?
I know. They're all kind of at a very different sort of tenor. It's interesting.
Oh, we can form an orchestra.
I was actually thinking about that. There's kind of like three tones. There's like, and then it kind of
That's
pitches.
my voice.
Yeah. Anyway.
No, I just hummed into it. Poor people listening to this as they're on their walk.
Yeah, I feel so sorry for them. They've got party noises in their head and okay, people.
And Jesse.
Jesse.
Yay, I'm here.
We'll introduce you
Sorry,
too.
I'm always here.
Okay.
Are we going to do this thing again?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
Yay, Jesse.
That's just,
Yay.
when I think of what it's like to go to heaven and the music that's going to be playing, the trumpet sound, when Jesus returns, that's it. Okay, so 200 episodes, people.
Crazy.
Here we are. Okay. It's been a pretty incredible ride on the podcast, and we absolutely stand on the shoulder of giants. I've only been here for a little amount of that time as the sort of caretaker of this podcast, same as Zanita, same as Jared, and same to a certain extent as Daniel. We're going to talk all about that. We're going to talk about the podcast. We're going to talk about some of the fond memories that we have from the past. We're maybe going to think about some of the things that we want to do in the future. But before we do that, Dan, it's been a little while since you've been on the podcast. I believe the last time was you and me speaking about the World Cup, which just feels like an eternity ago, but it was like this time last year kind of thing. So do you want to tell us a little bit about where you've been since then, what you've been up to, and sort of what's going on in the land of Dan?
Yeah. Excited that you haven't brought me on at the next World Cup. So.
Yeah, it's like we've been waiting a while.
The regular World Cup guest.
We passed to our correspondent.
Live from somewhere else in the world.
Yeah.
It's been good. Like this year has been pretty wild. I was working for a video production company in Sydney. The business at the start of the year closed down, so I was in various minds about what I'm supposed to do next, and then ended up starting my own business. A lot of the clients that were with the previous business followed me over. So yeah, it's been busy. And I get to do whatever I want to do, which is pretty cool. So we're actually shooting a short film in 2 weeks and then going to be putting that through film festivals next year and hoping to get some eyes on it. And at the very least, it'll be a big learning experience.
Amazing. So good. Well, we are super stoked for you. And this is, even I remember back when you were working for Adventist Media, you already had like a massive passion for film and, produced quite a few little films for us while we were, while you were here. So it's so cool. Cool. Okay. So here's what I want to do. I want to sort of start from the very beginning of where Science Radio came from. And there's been a few changes over the years. There's been some logo updates. There's been some jingle, sting updates. There's been a few changes in hosts, right?
Well, if you want to start at the very beginning, 136 years ago.
We spoke through shells.
And we started a little magazine called Signs of the Times.
Yes.
Yeah. I should have researched this beforehand, but I don't believe that there's any other podcast started by any other Signs of the Times magazine around the world similar to what we do. And like, for people who don't know, people might assume that we are the one and only science magazine, to which I say, that's right. But in actual fact, Signs of the Times was actually started quite a long time ago in America, and since then has moved out and had been adopted by various publishing houses and various church entities all around the world. And we are one of those. We started not too long, actually, after the original Signs of the Times magazine, which we actually still work very closely with the Americans. So that's really cool. But to my knowledge, we're the only Signs of the Times podcast that exists out there. It's kind of funny. People often ask me, why Science Radio? Like, isn't that like a bit of an outdated sort of title, And to that I say, well, yes, I guess it is.
So agreeable.
Yeah.
Just goes along with the critics.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, well,
You're right about everything.
yeah. I implicitly agree with everything you say. But I will say, it's cool to be able to be a caretaker for something that has a legacy, for something that has been around for longer than me, and that I hope will be around long after I am gone.
Whoa. Aren't you 140 years old? Wait, sorry, is it 100?
136?
138, I think.
138. I think we're moving into 139 as of the new year.
Next year, yeah.
Right. So we're getting to 140, which is, you know what, this is a sidetrack, but for the, Christians in the room, would it be better to celebrate a 140-year anniversary or a 144-year anniversary?
Not just 145? I mean, 150?
Well, yeah, that's a given. But like, I'm thinking biblically.
He's talking in Adventist code.
Yeah.
Prophetic code.
12 times
I don't know
12.
if it's necessary. It's like when people have a baby and they celebrate every week or every month.
Yeah.
6 months.
Oh, with like the little cork, the
You gotta put
corkboard
up
photos.
Yeah.
This is my
but some
36-month-year-old.
people have like parties. At least up north, every month is a party.
I wonder how many months old I am.
It's probably a fair few.
Yeah.
Okay, so 139 almost years ago, when the Adventists first washed ashore in Australia, we decided to start a few things. We decided to, start churches. We started a sanitarium. We started a publishing house, and we started a Signs of the Times magazine. A few years later, we would start the...
Actually, Jesse, just to put some input into that comment, the health food work, some of the churches and some of those things started a bit later.
Okay.
Many things this year have celebrated their 125th anniversary. Sanitarium Health Food Company, Adventist Record, those were about 125 years ago. But on the boat with the first Adventist sort of missionaries that were intentionally sent to this part of the world, they sent a printer.
Wow.
In other words, they had the idea that we need to use the media that's available at the time, and we need to reach Australia with the Adventist message. There were Christians here, obviously, but the Adventists felt they had a special thing to say about, Jesus is coming soon, live well, and they brought a printer out to start that message. And Signs of the Times was one of the first things that they invested in, that they made happen when they arrived. Before many of those other things, before there was a organized church, they were distributing pamphlets and flyers and what would become Signs of the Times.
Can I just ask what a printer looked like 125 years ago?
A man with a
and a feather?
three-piece suit, probably, a bowler's cap.
So you are the
We
printer.
have brought this man as our printer.
No, they brought the printer.
But he's going to
being-
handwrite everything out to 1,000
The
copies.
printer being the person who knew how to work the print machines.
So there
to
were print machines
So they didn't send
presumably
a
here in
printer like-
Australia already.
They didn't send a
Right.
Canon or a Xerox or
yeah.
a printer
Panasonic
being the
510
man,
printer.
the man who knows how to work
Gotcha.
the machine.
Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying.
That would have been, he would have been indispensable because he's like the man that holds all the knowledge. He's like, you can't fire me. I know everything.
Yeah.
Well, it's quite technical. I don't know if you guys have seen much of what happens on the print side of things, but even with the full color printers, you'd think, okay, we send the PDF off to our printing house. someone presses a button and the printing machine spits it out. Now it's all automated, but actually it's quite a process. And people with specific expertise, specific knowledge that have been trained, done apprenticeships, they're the ones that actually make our magazine happen. So
My first time with seeing the press that makes Signs magazine, I was like blown away by how long it is, because it's what is it, like 20 meters long?
Yeah.
And it's just like so many like ink cartridges and stuff through the side. Like there's a little platform where you can like walk along and just see each part of the process it's rolling through and stuff. And the sheets of paper are massive. And yeah, it was just crazy.
And it's crazy to think that 138 years later, after so many different changes in world history, going through different eras, ups and downs with the church, even though the magazine looks different, back then we didn't have social media. Back then we didn't have email. Back then we didn't have a podcast or YouTube or anything like that. But the message has stayed remarkably similar, even though the methodology has changed quite dramatically in those 138 years since we first started printing the magazine. In many ways, I think this is kind of where you were going with this, Jared, right? That this is the technology that we're using in this day and age to share that same message that Jesus is coming soon, and that there's hope, and that even in the darkness of this world, there is something that we can hold on to no matter what happens. So it's quite a remarkable thing to be part of this massive mission that has been going on for almost 150 years. But getting a little bit more recent, I'm looking at my timeline here, and it says February 12th, 2018.
Bucket.
Is the first episode of Signs. Back then it was called Signs the Times Radio. We've just shortened it to Signs Radio just for the sake of expediency. But the very first episode of Signs Radio was published on February 12th, 2018. I remember when it's called Bucket.
Yeah. It's not just me spitting out random
I
words.
was like, wait.
You get in on the game.
Is it because you like beaches or?
I think this is part of the. And actually, I will actually show you guys. If
it's like you don't believe me, but
yeah,
I believe you.
This is.
So the caption is, "Why is the man wearing a plastic bucket on his head?"
There's actually a little picture of a man wearing a bucket, and there's some LEDs underneath the bucket illuminating his face. Now, I will say, I listened to this episode when I first joined Adventist Media because I had a directive that I was supposed to be working on the podcast with Dan at the time. I can't remember anything about the episode, unfortunately, but I do remember, I think this is probably a good opportunity to, I guess, pay homage to the guy who started this, because Dan, you didn't start it, I didn't start it. This was, at the time, the dream of the then editor of Signs of the Times magazine, Kent Kingston. And Kent, if you've ever met him, he's a pretty out there guy. He's very passionate. He has a lot of big thinking. He's an out of the box kind of guy. He did a lot at Adventist Media in his time here, and he was an integral part of the team. And it was his sort of baby, his dream that kind of birthed Signs of the Times Radio. And for a long time, it was kind of him. And I don't know if, Dan, you were editing the episodes at the start, but you started editing the episodes, right?
Yeah, so I think Kent was actually the assistant editor of Signs, transitioning into being the editor. Because the editor at the time, Lee, was sort of finishing up, going into retirement. And I think, that was one of Kent's kind of initiatives going forward. I actually came on with Signs around July 2018. So he'd been doing it by himself for a few months. And then, I obviously came in to help him out with that. I came from a background of having done, film stuff, journalism stuff, not as much podcast, but enough to be able to help him out with the audio side of things. Obviously, learned a huge amount from Kent as well, because Kent was very skilled in. Yeah, it just blew my mind always that Kent had skills in almost every single area.
Yeah.
So I did appreciate and learn a lot from him and his mentorship and stuff at the time. So essentially what I was doing was editing the podcast and then also doing a bit of producing. So eventually I kind of took over, and he just had to rock up with his notes and stuff, and I would organize everything for him. And then also edit the podcast and deliver it and, put it out there. So, Kent was kind of like the personality of the show, and I was kind of behind the scenes just cutting out what I thought wouldn't service the podcast. And then the most annoying part, which was everybody's ums and ahs, because at the time that was a very manual process. So I'd literally be looking at the waveform and I wouldn't even need to listen to it, but I'd recognize the waveform of an or an ah. It was a fun job.
And I imagine back in the day, it was just people coming into the studio mostly to record.
No, actually, mostly it was phone-ins.
Oh.
So, that was one thing that's gotten better over time because of technology and stuff. But back in the day, we used to literally phone people and then, do the podcast that way.
Wow.
Which, got
kind of wild.
Yeah, got a bit better with when they had Skype available, or I don't think we were really using Zoom because this was pre-pandemic. But it's definitely gotten better. Like now there's, someone on the other side of the world can sound like they're in the room with you, which is so cool. And we actually reached that kind of point with like the technologies we found. The beginning was very manual.
It's kind of funny because I started a podcast around the same time. I had no idea that, what was going on over here at the time. And I remember those early years. I think there was kind of a wave of Adventist podcasts that kind of were all jumping up around that time. So maybe there was something in the air. I'm not sure.
Well, it's an interesting part of the story because like within the first month or so of me being here working with the magazine and the podcast, everything's so new and fresh. And then also meeting like a wider range of people who are, loosely connected to the projects here. One of them being yourself.
Yeah.
So I met you like a month into working here, and you and Josh Stothers were doing your own podcast. So then like meeting you at this conference and then like listening to how you're doing things and being like, whoa, like respect the stuff they do. And like what I really liked and that kind of fed into things later on was how like conversational you kept the podcast. Yeah, I really, really liked that. And the, other podcasters that I looked up to who had a similar style.
Yeah, I think that the conversational style that we have is definitely works for us. But I think the thing that I really appreciated about Science Radio when I eventually started to listen to it was sort of just how professional it sounded. And I think a lot of that came down to the sound editing. And we didn't have any of that. Like, obviously, Kent and his, presentation style, his personality style was a big part of it. But also, like, when we started, we had the conversation, but we didn't really know how to do anything else. We didn't really know how to edit a podcast. We didn't really know how to level it properly. We didn't know how to do compression or anything like that. It's fine for somebody sitting in the room and like listening, but it's also like when you get to a certain point and you have a certain expectation of how something should sound, it was a pretty massive learning curve for us. So we definitely learned a lot as well from others like yourself.
So Science Radio was definitely like, it had a kind of a structure in those early days. It's like, it's almost like writing an essay, you do the introduction, you get to learn about, also like going back a little bit. So essentially the way it was, I'm not sure if it's still the same way, but it was always like the author or a similar expert on a topic from an article that would be in that month. Now, with the publishing cycle, obviously you write articles months ahead and then it gets published like 3 months later or whatever. So it's always a little bit of an interesting balancing act in terms of what topics you're talking about. But then, so we'd try and tie it in as much as possible so that there'd be like interlinking with the magazine. So they'd almost complement each other. So the magazine would have links to the podcast. So people, if they want to hear more on that topic, they can hear it in the podcast as well. So it was, there was like 4 of them a month as well, generally. So it was very kind of more structured, I'd say.
Which that 4 a month is kind of insane to me.
Yeah, quite a lot.
We're currently doing 2 a month, and that's fairly reasonable. We might end up doing a little more in the future. There are some months where we do 3 just as an added bonus, but generally 2 is what we can handle right now. It'd be great to do 4. That would be very good, but it'd be a lot of content as well.
On top of a magazine.
On top of a magazine and social media and all the other stuff that we have our attention on. Jared, I don't know how involved, if at all, you were at this point in time, because at this point in time you were, in record, things were changing for you. what was your sort of perception maybe from the outside of this grand new initiative that was happening in and around your sphere?
I thought it was very cool that it was being tried. I watched with interest as the numbers sort of went up. I don't know what the numbers were sort of initially in those early 2018s, but it was seeing the podcast grow and grow quite well over the years. It's been very interesting to see that. We were trying at the time, I guess, in the other magazine that I'm involved with, live social media type broadcast. So it's a very similar weekly podcast show style. But we've only finally this year just gotten to convert those into podcast. And as Science Radio plays with adding sort of video, which we're doing today, we've gone the other way, playing with sort of adding podcasts to make it accessible on different platforms. I think from a big picture perspective, communication these days is all about repackaging and repurposing content for different platforms and making it appropriate for those platforms, because those platforms represent completely different audiences in many senses. So one of the nice things about Science Radio is that we get to play on Faith FM. So we've got a partnership there. So it's a whole new audience that may not be accessing the magazine. The other thing we've noticed recently is, so for example, this year I wrote an article about pornography. We got in an expert or someone with experience on pornography.
And actually, if I could just give our listeners a little bit of a behind the scenes on that, that was fantastic because we ran that article from The Conversation originally. And the author, Professor Renee Batoon, I really wanted to get on the podcast back in, I want to say it was April or May of this year, but for whatever reason, we just couldn't find a time. And then I believe it was like early October, she emailed me out of the blue and said, hey, I'm going to be in the area. Do you want to sit down and have a conversation? I just jumped on it. I was like, yes, absolutely. Let's just make this happen. And so it kind of ended up being a little bit late, but it ended up being a fantastic content piece that became really relevant for the changing conversation around vaping. And so being able to do stuff like that and having that option is really valuable. So yeah, that was that was a really cool, I guess, confluence of coincidences that really worked out.
I guess with both of those conversations you're talking about, often we write a lot of the articles for the magazine and we're not really experts. Like we do research and stuff. But
we quote experts, but we aren't experts ourselves.
Exactly. So sometimes it's awesome to have people like come in and speak more on that.
Yeah.
Can speak with authority.
Absolutely. So time went on, Dan. And you went from being the editor of the podcast to being a sometimes guest, and then eventually you became the host yourself. Do you want to tell us a little bit about sort of what happened?
Every time there's a change of host.
Well, to be fair, it's been a while since we've had, so it was overdue.
Sorry if anyone got a shock.
Everybody's just fallen asleep. Yeah, it was, like I think what I kind of wanted to bring to like Science Radio was more of a listening ear. Like what I really found inspiring in other podcasters were people who had the ability to bring out someone's personality. And like they're in a way that other people wouldn't in a regular conversation. I think that's the real skill and art of podcasting. So like, I gave that my almighty crack. I don't know if I was good at it, but I think, there was some really fun conversations. I actually it became one of my favorite things to do, to just, sit down and try and bring out a person's story or bring out their take that they probably wouldn't have been able to express otherwise. So that was a fun time.
Do you have a favorite conversation?
Well, some of them would go on for ages, especially because like I was trying to focus more on people I could bring in, sit down with, because there's always that bit of disconnect when you're like talking to someone over VoIP or whatever. One of the ones that was favorite for me was obviously the topics that I was interested in, which one of them was Todd Brody, a former soccer player who used to play for Sydney FC, and now is a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. And we sat down and talked for like almost 2 hours.
Wow.
Just because it was like an interesting topic for mine. I don't know if it was too technical for the audience, but then I like, there's how many times do you have an opportunity to sit down and like literally go into like great detail on this person's life? So that was fun. But yeah, just even other ones. Like there was another lady that we brought in who was a naturopath, and we got to talk to her about where naturopathy kind of plays into in the general realm of health, because there had been some negative press about naturopathy, and then it was like, well, no, actually it's not like apples and oranges. It's not medicine or naturopathy. Actually, they're supposed to work together. And so we had this like great chat about that. But there was quite a few fun ones in there. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. How about you guys? Any standouts for you guys? I mean, we then, I guess, if we want to think chronologically in terms of the story of the podcast, Dan went off to do his filmmaking wonderfulness, and it became sort of my thing. And there was a little bit of a weird transitional period where I was trying to get to grips with what it was like. And we started, and we did change a few things. Yeah, I don't know. It was just kind of like, I felt like what you had done was great, but wasn't me. And so we just shifted a few things around. I think because you mentioned this before, I think this comes back to that conversational style that I kind of fall into. Naturally, I went back to that style of things a little bit, which, I mean, is probably perfectly expressed in what we're doing right now, And we started back up again. Jared, came on a couple times, and then Zanita. Zanita has kind of become our Swiss Army knife of podcast / live stream co-hosts, because you are now doing Record Live a lot, and also, my trusty sidekick for this podcast a lot as well. When you're not traipsing around other countries and living your best life, of course.
Building shacks at the beach.
we will do that one day. We'll record a podcast at a shack one day. I want to do that.
I've told you this before. Bondi is your next destination, like right in the middle.
Wow. That's going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
It's just like
I don't know if I've ever
Gorilla
seen
Shack
Driftwood at
building.
Bondi.
You might end up on Bondi Rescue.
Yeah.
True.
That would be a good thing for the brand. I don't know.
I'll see. We'll see.
For the shack brand. So that's sort of where we're at now, right? So for the last sort of 40 or so episodes, it's been me and you, Zanita, and Jared, trying to, wave the flag that Dan was so faithfully waving beforehand in our own way. And so, yeah, I've listened to a lot of back episodes. Reflecting on some of the episodes that we've done before. So how about for you guys, have there been any standouts for you in the last couple of years of the podcast that you've really enjoyed or have been, particularly good?
I think the one with Patricia Wirikun. that was a good episode. That was a good conversation and such an important topic to talk about sex.
Mm-hmm.
It's something Christians don't always talk about helpfully, I find, but that was a helpful conversation. Look, there's countless.
She's like, 70s, right?
She's
like,
she's getting on, yeah.
She was
she's
a trailblazer
hilarious
in that
and she's
space.
Genius, yeah.
Yeah, but that
was a great
It was just a really good episode. Look, there's countless. For me, I try and listen to each episode that's released. In my role as editor, I want to know how we're tracking, what's going on, and I make sure I listen. And it's not a chore. It's not something I go, I have to listen. I need to do this. I actually enjoy it. I listen in my commute home or wherever, and I'm just like, ooh, there's a new episode. I can't wait to sink my teeth in it. If you haven't heard Jesse's recent episode called My Gambling Addiction, he tried something a little different. It was, we won't give away any too many spoilers.
Is this a confessional, Jesse?
This is,
A
Me
little.
and my priest, aka the entire audience of Science Radio.
Yourself and me, myself, and I.
Yeah.
But it was more, and Jesse and I have talked about other styles of podcasting that we'd like to experiment with one day, maybe not as a Science Radio podcast, but narrative, descriptive, feature telling, storytelling podcasting. And that's somewhat what you did with that episode. And
It is a little bit, yeah.
I thought it was, well done. So, we keep experimenting, trying new things. And I think I'm enjoying the ride. I'm enjoying most of the episodes.
Any for you, Zanita, that have been
Yeah,
particularly...
we've had some really interesting ones lately. I think, like we said, the porn and the sex one are really good. We also had a really good one on sunlight and the controversy around the sun and sunscreen.
That opened an entire new world for me.
Yeah, that was very interesting.
Yeah.
So that was with CC. That was good.
CC
and we had
Toro.
another one on the science of pain with Lachlan Townend, which was also very interesting. Kind of talking about that concept of how faith can heal you and your beliefs can heal you. And he kind of studies pain. He's a physiotherapist.
He's a physio, yeah. That's right.
So that was really interesting. Yeah. My favorite.
I really enjoyed the one that we did last year with Rosie Kendall, who is the CEO of Christians Against Poverty here in Australia. Fun fact, Zanita and I didn't actually realize that she was the CEO of the organization when we sat down with her. And then I did a quick Google search while we were doing the podcast, and I just messaged Zanita. I was like, do you know she's the CEO? And Zanita was just like, I thought she was just somebody from the company.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm going to change my questions now to be a little bit more. But I think the other ones that I've really loved have been when we've been able to tell somebody's story. And at our heart, I think, whether, we're you, Dan, making films nowadays, or we're writing articles, or we're sitting down with a microphone like we are now, we're storytellers and we love telling stories. Particularly, I think last year we got to tell Greg Finance's story. He is somebody who has just been through hell and back, almost quite literally, been to the brink of death, and now is a faithful, passionate follower of Jesus in his local community, pastoring a church. One of the most unbelievable stories I've ever heard of somebody, coming back from the brink to such amazing faith in Jesus. And so it's stories like that. When we get to hear about somebody who's gone through a radical change like that, it's just so inspiring. And I love to be able to bring those to the world, to be able to... A guy like him is just in his local community. He's not blowing his own trumpet, but it's just amazing to be able to advocate for people like that who are doing such a great thing in their local community and who have an amazing story to tell as well. So yeah, that's a big one for me.
I think at the heart of, what I'd like to see for Signs is that storytelling. What has God done for you, for your life? What has God done? And when you hear stories like Greg's, you really start to reflect on your own story and how God is moving in that space. Storytelling has been a passion of mine for many years. And just, if we can continue through the podcast, through the magazine, to highlight stories of where God's doing crazy things, those stories speak for themselves. Like, that's much of our work is done.
100%.
Because God's Spirit, the Holy Spirit, moves with those stories and actually impacts people's lives, I believe, in a really powerful way. When they hear a testimony like that, a story like that, they go, wow, like if God can do that for someone, he can do it for me too.
Yeah.
I've seen my own life impacted by amazing stories that other people have experienced God in amazing ways. Now, when I tell my story, or when I write, whenever I engage, want to tell a story in a space, in a platform that I've been given, I make sure to include some of my personal experience, because that just gives people a hook and an anchor point to understand a story and to connect with. And I think connection is so important.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of which, we have something very special for the people that are watching this.
Like impeccable timing.
Wow.
Oh, not
Cake.
Cake.
And our candles are kind of... Oh, yeah. All right, everybody.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you,
Thank you, Julie.
Welcome.
Wow.
This smoke is going to fill the room.
Sprinkler's gone.
Look at
There is
that.
literally a
What
sprinkler right above you.
I think all of our detectors are heat, not smoke. I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
Oh,
Well, the listeners
well,
get
they should have
fire
gone on
alarms
as soon as you walked in the room, Jesse.
Wow.
For those that are listening and not watching this on YouTube,
Yes.
this cake looks amazing. It's got Ferrero Rochers on top.
Oh,
So many
the best chocolate.
Layers of chocolate balls. It's just, wow.
It's just incredible. And I think we're not going to eat all of this cake by ourselves. Don't worry, dear
That's
listeners.
the next episode. ASMR.
Yeah. That's what the people really want.
But this is a celebration, right?
Mm.
And I think just what you've said, Jared, is just cut straight to the heart of what we're doing here. The stories that God can tell in our lives are just far greater and far better than any of the stories that we can write ourselves. And it's just such a privilege to be able to showcase those and to blow that trumpet and share those with the world. And that's what we've been doing for 200 episodes. And I just can't wait to see what the next 200 episodes look like.
I would love to know what the I don't know if you know this, what the audience's favorite episode has been.
Oh,
Do we have the most listened to?
Oh, like of all time?
of
Yeah.
all time? Okay, I can quickly look at the analytics to tell you what the latest
Daniel
is.
might know from his time.
What was it? What was
I
it
do
back in
remember
your
there
time?
was one. There was one that was at the top of the list for
About
like
Flat Earth?
ages. Yeah, but things might have changed.
Yeah,
Things
okay.
probably have changed with Jesse now in charge.
I believe last time I checked, it was actually the episode that we recorded this time last year.
On Christmas.
You, me, and Jared.
Huh.
It was about
Fascinating.
4,000, 5,000 downloads, which is
Whoa.
pretty. It's not usual for.
And that's not even plays, or is that like that's one and the same?
That's plays / listens.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's pretty unexpected.
It was the Zanita effect.
This is what we talked about. Yeah, we talked about the Zanita effect back then.
Your horde of fans, horde of
People
followers.
just love Zanita. And I mean, like, if we were to be honest, why wouldn't they?
Ah, so nice.
Are you opening it up for questioning?
Many podcasts start. There's a lot of podcasts. Like anyone
So
who's
many.
anyone wants to start a podcast.
Absolutely.
That's right. But to have 200 episodes, I think we're celebrating for a reason because
Yeah.
it's not easy to get to 200 episodes. So well
Yeah.
done, Jesse. Well done, Daniel.
Yeah.
Well done, team, for actually reaching that milestone. It's huge.
takes a lot of
It's
work.
amazing.
Oh, yeah. I think the latest stat that I saw is like 95% of podcasts don't get past 10 episodes.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So,
I've heard something similar, and we're reaching. I think we're reaching 1,000 downloads a month, sort of
Yeah.
average
Yeah.
across each month. So, look, thank you for listening to those that
Yeah.
are listening, and if you hear this, we're appreciative of you guys, and that's
Yeah.
not counting other places it's played like Faith FM and that sort of stuff. So, we're very grateful sitting here, reaching 200 episodes and going, wow, we've been blessed as well
Yeah.
by this project, by this experience. So
The thing has a lasting legacy because, I don't, if I'm around the place, I don't ever get asked or I don't receive comments about any articles I've written in the past. Rarely, if ever, probably not ever. But what I do get fairly regularly is, "Hey, I heard your podcast on the radio." Even though it's been a few years, so it just
it's still
shows-
there. It's
yeah,
still
shows-
cycling around. Yeah.
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 So good job,
Yeah.
guys. It's going to be on the airwaves for a while yet.
Yeah, sure will. So I think that probably brings us to the end of our conversation today. Thank you, Jared, for acknowledging really it wouldn't be possible to do this if people didn't listen and if people didn't support and if people didn't send in feedback and suggestions. And, this is a part of the greater community that is Signs of the Times magazine. And yes, we do a lot. We do the magazine, we do social media stuff, we do the podcast, we do email, all that sort of thing. But I know for some people this is maybe the only thing that you interact with on the magazine. And if that's the case, thank you very much. It's been amazing to be here with you. if I'm being totally honest, it's sometimes a very weird experience as a podcaster because you're speaking into a microphone, which is kind of like screaming into the void. You're never quite sure if anybody's actually listening. But the numbers tell us that people are listening. And, if we have kind of been like a companion for you over the last few months or years or however long you've been listening, thank you for spending the time with us. Thank you for going on this journey with us. Thank you for, giving us your time, because that's an incredibly valuable asset for you to be giving toward this thing. And, choosing to be part of this means that you haven't been part of somebody else's journey. And so we're grateful for that.
And if you have heard us on the podcast, it'd be great to hear from you. So
100%.
maybe info@signsofthetimes.org.au.
Yep.
If you email us, we'll see that and we'll just hear about your experience with the podcast. It'd be great to actually, this is a bit unplanned, unscripted, but I think it'd be lovely to hear from you, our listeners. So info@signsofthetimes.org.au. We'll put that in the episode description. But we'd love to hear from you, how you've experienced the podcast, if it's helped you with anything in particular, if you enjoy it, if you just want to say, hey, we're here, we're listening, we'd love to hear from you. So
Or also if there's anyone you really want us to have on.
Yeah.
Sometimes we mind blank.
Barack Obama.
And we just call Daniel or Mary Ellen.
Do you have a line to Barack? You can hook us.
He's my G,
Oh, well, let's do this.
We're buddies.
I think that, 200 is an inflection point. Like milestones tend to be an inflection point for projects like this. And so we are thinking about what does the future look like for the podcast. We're thinking about maybe what are some of the things we'd like to do come the new year. What are some of the, new challenges that we'd like to do? What are some of the ways we might want to change this up? So if you have feedback as well, use that email form to let us know what you'd like to see in the future, guests that you'd like. If we can get Barack Obama, by golly, we'll try to make it happen. But if there's anything else that you'd like us to tackle in the future, we'd love to do that. We've got lots of ideas for the future. And, as excited as I am for what's happened in the past, I think I'm even more excited for what's next. So can't wait to see you all there. Can't wait to, see what you guys have and all the exciting things we're going to delve into in the future.
And we'll get Dan on before the next World Cup.
Yeah.
It's all right. I'll let you know when the next soccer tournament is.
When Dan has his film, hit Cannes and, get the #1 whatever award it is that all the film festivals, I hope that you remember us when you come into your kingdom.
Not only am I going to remember you, but you're going to help me make this thing. See you in 2 weeks.
Oh, we have a new job. Is there anything else that you guys would like to say before we sign off?
I've got a question.
Yeah.
Oh,
Is this cake gluten-free?
sorry.
I don't think there's. I think
was at half the table.
I think there's a lot of gluten in this cake. Unfortunately,
We're just going to sit here and watch you guys.
Look at
it.
Oh no. But on the plus side, there is a lot of ash and debris from the sparklers on the cake. So that's
need the caramel on top.
It's a nice little addition. Anyway, Jared, Zanita, anything you'd like to add before we sign off today?
Signs is all about sharing a Christian perspective with the world today. So we're going to keep doing that, and we hope you will too.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you for listening. 200 episodes down, 200 to go. We'll see you there. See you later, everybody.
This is an Adventist Media podcast.